And when you stop and think about it, whether it's fiscal policy, trade and environment, trade and investment, border integrity, taxation, workplace relations, you pick any of the public policy issues, Indigenous relations, they're all best handled on a generic platform rather than a specific. The third one is good policy has primacy over politics. Political capital is invariably taken to mean the currency of representing one's interests to government. Policy integrity and credibility well and truly outpoints political patronage as the real and tangible currency for those in the business of advocacy. Representative bodies should be in the business of public policy, not politics. You should always have respect and understand politics because its dynamism will affect the way in which you go about it. But don't get caught up in politics to the point that it overshadows what you're pursuing in public policy. And remember, what's good policy for Australia is good policy for industry. Notice I didn't say it the other way around. I didn't say what's good policy for agriculture or good policy for mining is good for Australia. Other way. What's good policy for Australia is good policy for mining and good policy for agriculture. And good policy is always good politics. I can't think of bad policy that has endured. I challenge you to think of it. Even if it has the right objectives, like the carbon tax. The underlying objectives got a lot going for them, but it's terrible policy. The minerals resources rent tax or the super profits tax. The underlying objectives was to actually reform our royalty system. The policy is terrible. The MRRT was a lot better designed than the original super tax, but it's not necessary because it's not tax reform, it's a top-up tax. So we've now got 3 tiers of tax on the mineral sector. The objectives were right, but the policy was crap. And you won't see policy that's bad endure because it basically self-explodes. What's the word? You know what I mean. What is it? Implodes. Love it. These guys are good. Self-implodes. Fourth one, representative bodies are advocates, not, as they are often characterised, lobbyists. There's a palpable distinction between lobbyists and advocates. And it goes to the integrity and credibility in public policy representation. Public policy representation. Not the individual, not the characterisation of the discipline, but what they're actually doing. Advocates have real and enduring equity in the public policy outcome. Those of us in representative bodies, we're actually akin to the corporate affairs division of the industry we represent. We live with the outcome. If you're a lobbyist, you're mostly an introductory agency. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Some are very, very good. But just always understand what it is and why they do it. You need to see it for what it is in terms of its limitations in influencing public policy as distinct from opening doors. Those of us more akin to political operators, external to parliaments, and we've seen them, the so-called lobbyists, that don't have that necessary policy substance, they will be short-lived introductory agents and or merely part of the chattering classes of commentators lost in the logic of their own self-righteousness, if that. Now, the reform era that I spoke about gave rise to a whole new industry, a new class of lobbyists and independent intellectual think tanks and consultancies on both sides of politics. They made an art form out of capitalising on that third-party independence. Well, we're doing it, we're independent, so therefore it's okay. Well, if that actually had a lot of substance to it, there wouldn't be an advertising industry, would there? So people go to the message in the advert. They go to the substance of the argument, not actually where and how it came from. That's the real test of the credibility of the message. If it was just dismissed because the vested interests were putting it up, then nobody would advertise. But they capitalised on that. They also used the new tools of economic modelling. They weren't around when I was a boy. But there's no question they brought an increasing intellectual grunt to the cause of the advocates. And it's understandable when you reflect on the circumstances of the times. When Hooke came to power in 1993 and NFF was just getting into its stride, that was an era of pretty ordinary government beforehand, where political patronage reigned supreme. I can remember when we were doing the wheat debates and I was just a little kid up in Queensland and we were asked by the National Party what did we want in terms of the wheat marketing policies, and we told them, and they said, okay, we'll go down and fight for it. There was no real analysis about and holding to account what actually was in the best interest of the nation. It was just give us our writing instructions, we'll go do it. So, yeah, that was political patronage in its prime. What we have seen is a lot of these third-party advocates have really marketed themselves to companies in the aim of convincing corporates that this is the way in which you access Canberra and this is the way in which you affect public policy. It's the classic going in and telling the CEO what he wants to hear. You know, the warm, queasy feeling pissing down the inside of his leg. And it's not going to actually do the job because they need to know what it is that is going to give them the kind of outcome they're looking for. And the other point I'd make is a lot of those independent consultancies are very, very good. A lot of them came out of Treasury, finance and other parts of government because they were frustrated by the process of economic policy reform that was amoeba-like. If you look up the word amoeba-like, it's an amorphous mass of immovable jelly that spends its life engulfing particles. And I can tell you, that's pretty well summarises what the era was like before they started into that reform era. And so, you know, you think, I won't name names, I never do, but consultancies out there and they say, well, there was an ex-Treasury head and this one was an ex-Treasury officer and this one was an ex-finance officer, and these are some of the leading lights in terms of the economic think tank and the direction of Australian public policy. And I'd also, if I'm allowed a little indulgence, commentators need to be a little careful about classifying advocates, lobbyists and rent seekers all in the same pitch. Rent seekers, in my view, they're the ones that are traditionally found salivating over the prospect of using taxpayers' money to prop up their inefficient industries. They're the ones that really go after sexual interests. And there's plenty of them around. So if you want to really offend somebody who's an advocate or a third-party intellectual, call them a rent seeker and see how you get on. In my time in policy advocacy taught me nothing, or taught me nothing else. Staying the course of integrity and credibility is critical. Trying to pick winners on that variable sea breeze of politics or compromising your standards and policy positions for sycophancy always ends in tears. Don't confuse access with effectiveness. Plenty of people said after the super tax debate, Mitch Hooke, we won't have any access. One, it was crap. It doesn't work like that. But secondly, it's all about respect. And access is not efficiency and effectiveness. Equally, access is not sycophancy. I'll come back to that in a bit more. The fifth point, how am I going for time here, mate? Cool. The fifth point is corporate social responsibility is a defining concept for modern day businesses. When it's defined through the prism of social licence to operate, over and above a regulatory licence, right? So the regulatory licence gets you to the interview. The social licence is actually what you do with it. And you need to understand that through the prism of the tripartite of sustainable development: financial, environmental and social. It goes well and truly beyond what I like to say is the tagline symbolism of the wholemeal sandal wearers. That was funny. Sustainable development, corporate social responsibility is actually a serious concept, and it shouldn't be hijacked by the wholemeal sandal wearers for whatever cause. It's become increasingly determinant in capital and product markets, and not surprisingly, mining communities, companies of choice. Now, I'm sure in questions you'll ask me all about free, prior, informed consent, and you'll ask me about vetoes and access and all the rest of it. Don't confuse consent and veto. They're quite different. You can go after a social licence, which is your consent. The veto actually belongs to the state, the sovereign state. But not having the social licence within the community in which you operate can be a very, very costly exercise if you don't get that right. Now, for the minerals industry, I can tell you that's something we know an awful lot about. And maybe if I reflected on my time as a young agricultural advisor, I could tell you that I learned an awful lot of lessons out of agriculture that I took into the minerals industry.